and welcome to another edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. We have a great show for you today. We are going to start with some continued thoughts about the Super League that I talked about yesterday. We'll go over what that idea is, and I have some thoughts that kind of came to me after the show yesterday that I want to get out there into the world. And then we'll do a little bit of a Bama check-in, see how the Kalen DeBoer era is starting. I think it's starting very strongly, but definitely not Nick Saban's Bama anymore, I can tell you that. And then we have a little bit of update on some betting that has been going on around the 2025 national title game. There is a team in particular that everyone seems to be riding. And then we will finish it off with some spring game previews. There are a couple of games tomorrow that everyone is going to want to definitely tune into, so I break them down for you today. But before we jump in, I do want to remind you all we get tons of questions and comments throughout the show, and the best way for you all to get your questions on the screen and we can have a fun back and forth here, you can bring up something that maybe I had overlooked. You can use the tip and donation link at the bottom of the screen, gsmcpodcast.net. It's a huge help not only to us here at the network, but to you all. You get to watch the show and have kind of a fun interactive experience here. But let's jump right in. Let's talk about this Super League that we talked about yesterday a little bit, kind of broke down the idea and who it was coming from, but I had some ideas, or I had some thoughts really, that popped up after the show yesterday because everything was very new last morning, so was trying to piece together my ideas, and I think I have a more cohesive argument against it today. But before we jump into why I think, first of all, I don't love this idea, and second of all, I don't think it's going to work, at least in the short term, let's just go over the idea again real quickly. So College Sports Tomorrow, CST, as you'll hear them kind of referred to in a lot of articles and tweets and things of that nature, have proposed an idea for an 80-team Super League. This 80-team Super League would essentially be a governing body over college football. It would be able to regulate things like NIL and the transfer portal, two things that everyone wants regulated, right? Everyone wants an answer to those two big problems, so I think that's something that is definitely working in their favor. So 70 of those 80 teams that we just talked about will be the Power 5 teams plus Notre Dame and SMU, who is now Power 5 anyway, so they're included in the Power 5 schools, but Notre Dame, along with those Power 5 teams from this next year, those teams are entirely safe. Year in and year out, they have no pressure to be kicked out of the Super League in any way, so they really don't have any reason to worry about that. And compensation for these teams, these 70 teams, or these 80 teams, in fact, will be very depending on the brand power of the school. It'll school by school basis will be the way that they worry about compensation there. The 10 teams that are not safe of the 80 are a group of 5 teams and others that will work in kind of a promotion relegation type model. So there's about 50 plus schools that are on the outside of this 70 team safe area looking in, and they will compete to be in that last 10 team group. So I'm not exactly sure how promotion and relegation will work, how many teams will get promoted and relegated every year, but it looks like that is what's going to happen. And it's kind of like in English soccer leagues, if you're familiar with the Premier League and there's subsidiaries, there are tons of promotion and relegation, and that's a really fun idea. I just don't love that it's only happening in one part of the country or for certain teams, but these 80 teams will be split into 10-team divisions. The winners of those divisions and the next 8 highest records will move on to the playoffs, so a 16-team playoff in this format. This would get rid of the playoff committee, which is something that I would technically back, but I'll get to why I don't necessarily think this is the best way to go about it. They have made a proposal to the ACC, which makes sense because the ACC is the conference that everyone is kind of dubbing as the next one to get taken advantage of in all of this. But the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Big 12 have all canceled their meetings with this entity. So ESPN and Fox are really the ones that they're going to need on board if they want this thing to be the future of the sport. But I gave you an idea of kind of what I thought briefly yesterday, but I kind of wanted to go into a little bit more depth as my brain was able to kind of wrap my head around this idea a little bit more yesterday and give you a little bit better of a breakdown, I suppose. But let's start with 70 teams being safe is an absolute non-starter for me. I think if you're introducing promotion and relegation into college football, it should be that way for absolutely everyone. There should be no one that's safe, and I don't think I would ever really waver from that idea. If the top teams are capable, if they are the teams that we think they are, they wouldn't have to worry about relegation anyway. So that's one thing that I just don't like. I think college football should never be a place where people are, or teams are segmented in the sense that there are a group of teams that have absolutely no shot to win a national title. Now, you can make the argument there are a ton of teams in the country that have no shot to win a title, but at the very least, they're, at the table. In this scenario, there would be 70 teams that are at the table every single year, and then a rotating cast of 10 out of about, I think, somewhere around 55 or so that would be at the table any given year. So I just don't love that idea. I think that's anti-college football in some ways. And then I am confused as to how they're going to make these divisions up. So to me, it looks like they're going to break it up in terms of difficulty. So try to power rank these teams and set it up to where the number one team is playing the best team overall from a year ago is playing the second best 2 seed, or however that ends up working out. But I think that's the way that they're going to go about it. But I've seen a couple of people throw out ideas of a possible regional, like a conference type model for these 10 divisions. And I think there's problems with both of those ideas. So first, the kind of merit-based making it so every division is as even as possible. I think that's almost impossible in the world of college football just because of the changing nature of the sport. It's always going to have people rolling in and out of it. Teams are going to be changing year over year. So making these 8 divisions totally even in terms of difficulty is nearly impossible. And then you add in that they're not going to have a playoff committee, or they're not going to have a formula like a BCS type formula, which is what I tend to think they should be doing to figure out who the best teams are. Some teams are going to get left out that are better than teams that get in. That's just kind of the nature of the sport. That's how conferences have worked for a really long time, and that's how this would work. And then if you break it up into conferences, it's the same problem, right? It's the problem that we have today. The SEC and Big Ten schools, they play a much tougher schedule than the ACC and the Big 12 schools. It's not that the Big 12 schools and the ACC schools can't have tough schedules, but the difference in the week-to-week grind is pretty stark when you really look at it. So I think this is something that there's almost no way to create a fair and equitable 8 divisions where everyone is playing the same difficulty of schedule, and we have this ability to say, okay, these are the 16 teams getting in, and no one has a problem with that. That's just not something that can happen in a sport that has so many teams involved and so much variety. Excuse me, I totally lost the word. Has so much variety in the ability of these teams and the talent of these teams. It's impossible to create a entirely fair structure in these 8 divisions. So I think that's another big time problem for me. We did just talk about it. It is possible they break up into conferences. If they have no conferences and there's absolutely no regionality to this, that's a total deal breaker for me. And I think it's a deal breaker for a lot of you and a lot of college football fans across the country, because that's what makes this sport awesome. The ability to wake up one morning and be playing, let's say, Clemson, and you live in Atlanta, Georgia, like I grew up, and you can wake up and look across the street, see a Clemson flag, and they're playing Georgia Tech, and you're a Georgia Tech fan, and that makes you super mad. Part of that is ingrained in college football. That's the whole point of why, conferences are so great. And obviously we have kind of started to lose that as, more and more conferences have started to stockpile, mainly the SEC and the Big Ten. But the reality is we have to keep it as much as possible. We have to keep this regionality part of the sport as much as we can. If it were up to me, I think we would go back to the Southwest Conference and we would have very regional conferences that, yeah, they might be a little bit different in terms of difficulty, but we would work it out on the back end with some type of BCS model. So I'm fully in favor of the regional model. We've obviously gone a little bit away from that in recent years, but I think this would take us entirely away from that, which is something that I don't think anyone wants. And then finally, the one thing about this is you would get a ton of different games that you've never seen before. You would get games that you haven't even dreamed of seeing before. You would get, I don't know, Penn State against Texas Tech. It would just be very, very weird matchups pretty much week in, week out. And that's really cool. That's a cool idea to see all these different teams playing each other. I think you would get some very specific offenses, which is really fun, especially from those lower level teams that are trying to make some noise. Maybe they'd run like a little triple option type offense to catch people off guard and maybe make a run in this type model. But the biggest problem with that is you don't have the rivalries. You don't have the history of these matchups. You don't have the pageantry that goes along with it. And that's college football. At the end of the day, college football is rivalries. It is OU Texas being split at the 50-yard line. It is the Iron Bowl on a Saturday being as loud as it can possibly be. It is the game in the big house being just an insane environment from start to finish. All of that stuff is vital to college football. And if you start taking that away, or if you take it away in one fell swoop, you're going to lose a lot of fans very quickly. So I think those are my biggest problems with the actual structure of it. Now let's get to why I'm not super worried about this idea, at least for the time being, as we go into this new kind of era of college football. I did mention the SEC, the Big Ten, and the Big 12 canceled meetings. There's a real big reason for that, and the reason is the sport is coming to them. They have really no reason to sit down with much of anyone and settle for anything that keeps anyone outside those three, or really SEC and Big Ten more than anyone else, keep anyone else involved. The SEC and the Big Ten are in a position where at some point they could break off and have their own Super League. I know for a fact, actually, that this has been talked about in SEC and Big Ten circles, and it's been talked about a lot. So at the end of the day, I think they're in a position where they pretty much own the sport at this moment, and it keeps coming towards them. They keep getting more power, so why would they sit down with another entity and say, okay, yeah, we'll let everyone back into the party when they control the party right now? And then finally, I think this is a really fun idea to talk about. This is something that, it's fun to imagine, and maybe I'll take a whack at, putting together 8 divisions for you guys over the weekend and come back with my version of what this would look like on Monday or Tuesday. But I think the reality is, if you really want this to happen, ESPN and Fox are the first dominoes to fall. That's the way it is with pretty much everything in the sport. Nothing gets done in the sport without those two being a big part of it, without those two giving their sign off. So you need ESPN and Fox involved. You need them to get their sign off, and that's going to be really tough to do because the media deals they have with these conferences right now, mainly the SEC and the Big Ten, are pretty lucrative. So I don't think they're in a position to necessarily jeopardize that for an idea that, in my opinion, seems a little half-baked at this point. So I think there's got to be a ton of funding that goes towards the top dogs, right? We talked about the SEC and the Big Ten. This is their sport at the time being. So you have to be able to, if you want this to happen, you have to be able to funnel money to those teams like crazy. Do it at a degree that would make everyone else very, very mad. The same way this playoff agreement did, the same way that a lot of these new things that are happening around the sport have made people really mad. So I think there's a couple of things. Obviously, Fox and ESPN have to be involved. You have to get more money to these SEC and Big Ten teams. And then finally, you have to have a different plan for these divisions. You have to preserve rivalries. You have to find a way to create either a entirely even division group, which is not possible in terms of difficulty through divisions, or you have to re-employ the playoff committee, which is not necessarily what I would go for. I would go for more of a BCS type model to figure out what those 8 at-large teams would be, because there's not a way in the world where, whether it's conferences or it's just ranked divisions in terms of difficulty, there's no way you're going to have a total even split in terms of the schedule that people are playing. So I think that's going to be the three biggest things. You got to get the TV deals on board, because that's the biggest thing, and that's going to take a while to do. The SEC and the Big Ten have to feel like they're still at the head of the table and are getting the most money, and the plan just has to be tweaked a little bit. I think the nuances of this plan just have to be fixed a little bit. So overall, it's a really fun idea. It's fun to think about. People will be talking about it a lot. I'm sure there's a lot of people that really like this idea. I mean, this group has a ton of people that are pretty important in the college football space. So this is not the last time you will hear from CST. This is not the last time I will talk about them, I'm sure. But at the end of the day, there's going to have to be changes, and there's going to have to be some big-time players that come to the table with this group to make this really come to reality. But for the time being, we'll let the chips fall where they may. We'll let things develop and then come back to that. But we're going to take our first break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about Bama and a little update on how the DeBoer era is starting. A lot of people have a lot of opinions about Bama, and I can tell you one thing, it is not Saban's Bama anymore, but I will talk about them right when we get back from this.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about the Super League and some continued thoughts about that and why I think you probably don't have to worry about it, at least for the next little bit. But now let's talk about Bama. Let's do a little check-in on the Crimson Tide, see how they're doing with a new head coach. Obviously, the DeBoer era started back in, I believe, January. The timeline is so fuzzy at this point. It feels like it was years ago. But Nick Saban retired, life changed in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, very quickly. I've gotten into the hiring process a little bit here. Greg Byrne did an incredible job handling this. They had two guys really at the front of the table. It was Mike Norvell and their now head coach, Kalen DeBoer. So although they did get some raises for some other coaches along the way, which is always a nice thing for those coaches. But there's been a lot of things that have happened since then. He has been essentially thrown into a situation that no one really envies. No one is necessarily going crazy trying to get in his position because the pressure is just off the charts. So let's kind of go into how he's handled that, the couple of hurdles that he's had to go through, and then get to the reality of this situation and what I kind of expect from him. So first, let's start with the portal, because that was where kind of the story was right after Saban retired. There was 30 players on their way out of the program. That was that post-Saban portal. A couple of guys entered earlier, but there were a ton of guys that found their way out, including Isaiah Bond, their reception leader from a year ago, and then Caleb Downs, their leading tackler. So two huge guys on either side of the ball that you absolutely would love to have in Tuscaloosa that found their way out. Isaiah Bond is now at Texas. Caleb Downs is now at Ohio State. So there's a chance you will be seeing those guys in postseason football if you're the Crimson Tide. But then the reload started because it absolutely had to. They had some guys going off to the NFL. Obviously, the portal hit was huge, so they needed to reload, and they really did. Parker Brailsworth, who's someone that I've heard kind of mixed reviews. Not sure if he's going to carve out that starting spot at center after all. We'll see. But Parker Brailsford, Jeremy Bernard, and Austin Mack all came from Washington over with Kalen DeBoer. They also got LT Overton from A&M, Damani Jackson from USC, Keon Saab from Michigan, all of whom are very likely to play for Bama in 2024. Damani Jackson was, I believe, recruited by Nick Saban, but keeping him recruited and keeping him on campus is absolutely huge. Keon Saab was a huge addition from Michigan. And despite all that change, the foundation on this team is very, very solid. When you look at this roster up and down, there are some holes, there are some worries for sure if you're a Bama fan, but you have a starting quarterback coming back in Jalen Milroe. You have two linebackers that I think is the best duo in the country when you talk about Deontay Lawson and Jahad Campbell. Tyler Booker on the front end of that offensive line is absolutely huge. It sounds like Caden Proctor is finding his way back to Bama, which is absolutely huge. And then Malachi Moore in the back end of that defense might be the heartbeat and the leader of this entire team. So I think when you look at this team, yes, there are worries that used to not be there when, Bama was at the height of their powers. But at the end of the day, they have a really, really solid group of not only incredible players, but incredible leaders at really important positions. So I think this team is in a position where, considering all of the people that found their way out of this program, they're in about as good a position as you could possibly hope if you are a Crimson Tide fan. But let's get to the staff building, because that might have been tougher than the portal building, if I'm being totally honest. The staff was a more arduous task than he thought it was going to be, I think, in Kalen DeBoer's case. He had two people on the staff that then about 2 weeks later, or really a whole 15 minutes after being in Tuscaloosa, found their way back to Seattle. And Scott Huff, the offensive line coach, and Ryan Grubb, the OC, both found their way back to Seattle, joined the Seahawks and Mike McDonald up there. So he had to figure that out. He elevated the tight end coach, Nick Sheridan, to the OC role, someone that I like a lot that seems to be really, really smart and really, really confident in his abilities in the little interviews that I've seen of him. And then Chris Kapilovich has taken over as the O-line coach, a guy with just so much experience in this sport. So two guys that, definitely not the hiccup that you wanted, but definitely a great group that he has in there. And then you look at the rest of it, and it just gets better. Eddie Reese and Robert Gillespie, keeping those two guys in Tuscaloosa is huge. Eddie Reese, the D-line coach, Robert Gillespie, the running back coach, two guys that were just remarkable, and that was definitely priority number one when he got on campus. And then this defensive staff is just remarkable. They got Kane Womack from the South Alabama. He was their head coach. He's coming in as the defensive coordinator. They got Maurice Lindquist, a head coach from Buffalo, to be their DB coach. Colin Hitzler is a linebacker coach that's just remarkable, a fast riser in this industry. And then on the offensive side of the ball, he brought over Jamarcus Shepard from Washington as well, who is one of the best wide receiver coaches in the entire country. So this staff, I think, despite having to go through that little hiccup, having to jump over a couple of hurdles, it's remarkably talented, both in elite development, and also there's one big area where people were questioning Kalen DeBoer's ability to complete this job, and it's recruiting in the South, right? Everyone was worried, can he fit in? Can he, walk into a living room in Louisiana and eat a pot of gumbo and know what he's talking about? Because that is a part of recruiting now. And I think he's really filled the staff with a ton of people that kind of help that a little bit. So Eddie Reese, obviously, Robert Gillespie, obviously. They've been doing this at Tuscaloosa for quite some time. But Kane Womack is a huge pickup. He is someone that has so much energy, is someone that everyone seems to love to be around. And I think he's someone that, if he's not a head coach in a couple of years, then something's wrong with the hiring process, I can tell you that. But I think this staff is about as good as you possibly could have hoped, especially with Nick Saban walking out the door and some of that, hiring ability where he just walks in the room and you say yes is now out the door. He did a remarkable job, especially on the defensive side of the ball, filling out a staff that he had to fill out entirely from outside sources. There was no one coming over from Washington, probably for good reason, to be fair, but filling that out with the people that he did is just remarkable. And then let's get to kind of the messaging of him and kind of the way he's carried himself over these last couple of weeks, because you can tell a lot about a coach by short interviews and just kind of how he handles himself on a day-to-day basis, and he seems as solid as they come. Kalen DeBoer just seems like he does not waver. I don't think a lot of people expected him to be the next head coach of Alabama. I don't think he expected to be the next head coach of Alabama, but he never really hesitated. He never seemed scared of this chance, of this opportunity. He never seemed worried of taking over for someone like Nick Saban, which was the talk of the town. No one wants to take over for a legend. Well, he did. He really wanted to be a part of Alabama, be a part of this program, and continue what Nick Saban started, which is something that he has made very clear in a couple of interviews over this last couple of weeks that I've seen. He really knows what this job is about. He knows the expectations that are going to be coming after him this next couple of years, and he's ready to deliver. I mean, the dude is 104-12 as a head coach. That's why he's had this remarkable rise, won the Pac-12 a year ago and knocked off Texas in the Sugar Bowl, and just lost in the title game because some guys just didn't have their best day that day. But I think when you're looking at all of these different things and you're looking at all of the ability that he has had throughout his coaching career, I think there's so many different ways to value a head coach. There's so many different ways to measure him up against other people, but on-field results is always the best way to go about things, and this dude just wins football games. There was not a soul picking Washington to go to the heights they did a year ago, at least non-Husky fans. I will put that caveat in there, but this dude made it happen, and he made it happen very, very quickly up there. So he's someone that is as consistent as they come. It seems like he just never wavers. There's never a panic button for him. He just always has a plan A, he has a plan B, he has a plan C. So he's someone that, although, this job, it's just started, and the real heat of this job is coming, in the fall in 2024 and beyond, but as of right now, he looks as steady as you could possibly be in this situation, because it's a really tough situation. There's no two ways about that. But finally, let's get to kind of the reality of what this situation is and what I kind of expect from Kalen DeBoer, not only in 2024, but as we kind of continue on in his time in Tuscaloosa. First of all, he's a remarkable head coach. He's done nothing but answer the bell, nothing but prove people that doubt him wrong. He is just incredible. I think he continues to impress me every time that I see him, but he isn't Nick Saban. No one is Nick Saban. That's something that Bama fans will fully understand at this point, but I think they'll have to learn kind of in a hard way in the next couple of years. Bama does have one of the best infrastructures in all of college football. Saban has done a remarkable job in building that, recruiting footprint, the ability to go to some of the boosters that you need to go to and get the money that you need to get is something that Bama is almost second to none in college football. The infrastructure is incredible if you win. That's the biggest if in the world, because Nick Saban never really had to worry about that. After 2007, he was off to the races and he didn't look back. So I think this is going to be really interesting to see not only how does it develop into 2024, but how does it develop into, 2026 version of Bama, because that's really the version of Bama that I'm more concerned with. I think this 2024 version is going to be just fine. It's going to be different. There's no two ways about that. I don't know if you guys are on Twitter a lot, but I don't know if you've seen Roll Tide Willie out at practices, doing his whole thing, and it's a different atmosphere. There's no two ways about that. I was watching a interview with Kalen DeBoer and Josh Pate where Josh Pate said everyone in the building says it's different, not worse, but different. And I think that's the biggest thing that Bama fans are going to have to wrap their head around. It's not going to be the same Alabama, and it shouldn't be. There's no coach is going to be Nick Saban. No coach should walk in trying to be Nick Saban, because you're going to come up short. There's no world where you don't come up short, because that's the greatest coach of all time, and he might be for a really, really long time. It's going to take a lot for someone to pass him up. So Kalen DeBoer's just got to be Kalen DeBoer, and I think that's plenty to get the job done at Bama. And I talked about it. I think they're going to get off to a great start in 2024. Obviously, that will not define the Kalen DeBoer era in Alabama by any means, but I think they can get off to a start that will make this fan base fully believe in this guy and fully jump on board and do it to an extent where I think there are a lot of Bama fans that are plenty excited about this team and plenty excited about what Kalen DeBoer can do there, but there's still part of them that definitely misses Nick Saban, and it'll be weird when he's not on the sideline come fall. But at the end of the day, you have a guy that is as confident, is as accomplished, and has as much ability as many coaches across the country. Unless you were going to get Kirby Smart, which you weren't. I think Kalen DeBoer is about as good as you can do. He's someone that I trust to kind of handle all of this, even though, Bama and Washington are two entirely different worlds, entirely different jobs with totally different pressures and some things that he's going to have to get used to, including, learning a ton of people's names that he will meet every now and then and have to get money from, or do recruiting visits and do things a little bit differently than he did up in Washington. But he's capable of doing all of that. He is nothing if not a chameleon, if not someone that can adapt to his circumstances and handle them just beautifully. So while, he's not going to be Nick Saban, and while Bama in the long run will take a step back, I want that to be very, very clear. The idea that Bama is going to continue on a, multi-decade 7-title run is not something that's likely going to happen. Let's be totally honest with each other. But the ability of this guy is off the charts. The ability that he can get out of this team in 2024, I think they could win a title in 2024. But beyond that is really what we're going to find out if he's fully up for this job. I tend to believe he is. I tend to believe he is as good of a hire as they possibly could have made for this role. But 2024 won't tell you the tale. 2025 and 6 and 7 will tell you who he's going to be to Bama fans in the long run, and if he can fill the just massive shoes that were left behind by Nick Saban. But as of right now, if you're a Bama fan, I'd feel pretty good. You are in a position where you have one of the best coaches in the country, you have one of the best rosters in the country, you have one of the best infrastructures in the country. You are still Bama. For this second, you are still Bama. Now, that can change pretty quickly in the fall, but for the time being, I would feel just fine if I was a Crimson Tide fan. But we're going to take our second break here, and when we come back, we're going to talk about a little bit of a betting trend that has happened around the 2025 national title game. So stick with us, and we will be right back with that.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back, everyone. We just talked about Bama, a little bit check-in on the Crimson Tide over there in Tuscaloosa, and now let's talk about a little betting trend that has happened around the 2025 national title. It looks about 41.4% of public money is on Ohio State to win the national title next year, according to John Ewing over at BetMGM. That is a remarkable percentage of people going for the Buckeyes. Unless someone put an absolute absurd amount of money down, there is a huge mass of people that are betting on the Buckeyes to win the national title. So I wanted to break that down, as well as where everyone else falls and kind of how that aligns with the odds for them to actually lift the trophy. So let's jump in here and break this down. So Ohio State, obviously well up at the top at 41.4%. Their natty odds are second at plus 424. So makes a little bit of sense. They kind of fit into that realm. Georgia kind of the same, 16% plus 327. So definitely makes sense there. Texas next, I think that makes sense. They're third in the title odds. They're third in the public share, so fits up perfectly there. And then it gets totally weird. Colorado at 5.1% of the public share of money at national title odds. And if you look at those odds, they are very long. 1,300, 344. That's sketchy. I'll be totally honest with you. 5.1% of people might just be lighting money on fire, but I'm not a betting man, so I guess I can't necessarily throw judgment. But there's a couple of things here that I want to definitely point out. Oh, first of all, before we jump into all this stuff, Notre Dame at 4% is someone that yesterday absolutely should have been in the list of people that can win a title. They would be in the group that if the stars align, a couple of things need to go their way, but they're a very good team. For some reason, I just totally bypassed them yesterday. But let's get into this real quick. First of all, the gap between Georgia and Ohio State is insanity, to be totally honest with you. Not that Ohio State is not someone that I am tabbing as definite contender for a national title. They absolutely are, and they're right up there with Georgia, but the gap should not be that big. I don't know what happened there, but it's absolutely wild. It'll definitely be closer once we kick off in August 31st, but these two teams are definitely going to be up top. I can feel very confident about that. Ohio State has had a remarkable offseason, so I think it's somewhat a kind of prisoner of the moment type thing for some of these bettors, and they're getting them while they can. But I talked about it earlier, 5.1% of people are lighting their money on fire. No disrespect to Colorado. I did put them in the group that technically could win a title with the talent that they have, but I wouldn't touch them with a 10-foot pole. They are not someone that I would think has a real shot to lift the trophy. If they get into the playoff, then maybe I'll be eating my words, but I don't necessarily expect that from the Buffs this season. So I would not necessarily be part of that 5.1%, I guess is the best way to put that. But this definitely does back up the kind of SEC, Big Ten, and everyone else theory. Obviously, Colorado throws a wrench into that, but a lot of these teams are SEC teams in particular. But definitely some Big Ten teams that dominate this thing. You have Florida State in there from the ACC. You have Colorado and Utah from the Big 12, but all of those are relatively small percentages of the pie here. So the SEC and the Big Ten are set to do what they always do. Also, no Clemson on here, which I thought was really interesting. They are at the same odds to win the ACC as Florida State is, so I don't know if they fall somewhere right below this list. I believe there's about 9.9% still left over after this that is split up amongst everyone else in the country, so it could be that Clemson is just on the outside looking in, but definitely interesting that Clemson is not, above a team like Utah that is, a lot lower or a lot higher on this list than I would have thought, honestly. And then someone like Oregon is much lower on this list than I would have thought, below teams like Tennessee and Ole Miss that I tend to think they're just better than. I understand that Ole Miss and Tennessee, if they do hit their heights, especially at quarterback, they can do some really remarkable things. But when you look at Oregon's roster, it just looks more confident than those other two in terms of just across the board. I feel better about the Oregon roster and particularly the quarterback position, where I know I'm going to get good quarterback play from Dylan Gabriel. I don't necessarily know that about Nico Iamaleava. I do know that technically about Jackson Dart a little bit, but I do think Oregon should be much higher on this list, but at the end of the day, people are welcome to do what they want to do with their money. I guess a lot of people are falling victim to the they can't handle the physicality of the Big Ten type of argument that people have thrown out there for Oregon. And then a couple of teams that are really standing out that are on this list that I didn't expect is LSU, especially being that high is something I did not expect. I think I've been singing Garrett Nussmeier's praises on this show for quite some time now. I did not think that many people were with me in that sentiment. So I think there's tons to be excited about this Tigers team. I think this defensive staff is going to be a whole lot better, which helps a ton. So, oh, excuse me. I understand where that's coming from, but them being above Alabama and Michigan and Oregon is something I did not expect when looking at this list. And then Tennessee getting some love on this list above Oregon, as we talked about earlier. I think Nico Iamaleava is capable of essentially anything. He is someone that I think is a lot closer to Hendon Hooker than he is to Joe Milton. He might be the perfect mix of both of them, if I'm being totally honest. But he is starting for his first year. So it will be interesting if Tennessee can hit those heights. If he can hit, then a lot of things on that roster look really good, especially that edge rusher James Pierce Jr., who's someone that is just off the charts good. So I think this is a really interesting list. I think there's a ton of different things that we could unpack here. Notre Dame sitting where they're sitting doesn't necessarily surprise me. That schedule this year, the talk every year is that Notre Dame doesn't play anyone. That's not true 9 times out of 10. This is the 1 time out of 10 where it's kind of true. The schedule is a little bit lighter. It's a little bit easier than it has been in recent years. And I think they're going to benefit from that. Obviously, Riley Leonard coming over in the portal is huge. He does need to get, I think, a little bit healthy. I think he's out of practice right now, if I'm not mistaken. But once he gets back healthy, he is a good quarterback, very consistent, and can do the things that Notre Dame is going to ask him to do. So I think this Notre Dame team is very interesting. There's a little bit of unknown on my end just because there's a lot of moving parts on that offense, especially at the wide receiver position. Need some guys to hit that haven't hit in the past. Have Bo Collins coming in from Clemson, which is a huge help, but need a little bit of help at that wide receiver position where it's been a struggle over the past couple of years, to kind of say the least, honestly. Jaden Greathouse is another wide receiver over there that I'm watching really, really closely. And I think with all of this stuff, you see kind of a little bit more of everything on this list. You know, you see every big-time conference represented here. Obviously, the SEC and the Big Ten are gobbling up a lot of the percentages here, as they probably should. But at the end of the day, you do see, you know, some people betting Utah, where they can get into the dance now by winning the Big 12, and they have a really good chance to do that. Someone like Kansas State, I'm sure, is not far off this list, is another team that can do that. So you kind of see the idea of the 12-team playoff giving everyone a shot kind of reflected here, where they're betting on everyone kind of equally. It's no longer, filling up on, a couple of very specific teams. Obviously, a lot of people are filling up on Ohio State, but I think this money will slowly start to even split up even more and kind of spread out even more, and we'll see more and more people kind of get up to that 1.5, 2% marker that Oregon and Florida State are at right now. So I think this is something that is going to be really interesting to watch as the offseason goes on. I think there's a lot of different teams that can make noise, and that means the betting market absolutely will be looking for them. There will be people out there trying to find the TCU of this year, just hoping that they can actually lift the trophy instead of what happened to TCU on that day against Georgia. But at the end of the day, I think this makes a good amount of sense to me for the most part. I think Ohio State won the postseason. I think people are reacting to that. I think that totally makes sense that this is going to be at the top of the list. I was surprised at the gap that has emerged, but at the end of the day, it makes sense that Ohio State is all the way up there. I think there are some crazy picks, including Colorado on here, but overall, betting this far in advance for a national title is just wild. It's just something that is insane most years, but especially this year, because we talked about it, I believe, earlier this week when we were breaking down the transfer portal cycle that is on the way, and it's going to be insane. It's going to be off the walls. There are going to be a ton of players moving around, and there are going to be a ton of these teams on this list being very active, especially someone like Alabama, and we will break all that down next week, I believe. So I think as of right now, I would hold on to your money if you're a betting person. I would not worry about this too much, because it's not worth it. As of right now, you do not know what these teams are going to really look like, so I would hold on to your money and then make a bet when you feel a little bit more confident. But honestly, I'm not your mom, so do what you want. But we are going to take our last break here. And when we come back, we're going to do a little spring game preview. There are a couple of games tomorrow that you guys should definitely be watching out for. And then one game that I'm definitely going to be watching out for some specific reasons that I'll break down here after this. So stick with us and we will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about a little betting trend that is forming around the 2025 National Championship game, but now let's jump into some spring games that are going to be going on tomorrow, April 6th. There are a couple of teams that are in action that you are definitely going to want to tune into, and let's start with Clemson. They are kind of the main event on tomorrow, so we will definitely, let's jump into them first. First of all, let's get into storylines, and then we'll get into kind of things that I'm watching in particular. First of all, the main storyline is Clemson slipping, or are they kind of reigniting? Everyone is kind of writing Clemson off after the last couple of years. They want to see Dabo Swinney continue to fall off the pedestal that he has formed, but everything is still on the table for this team. I talked about it yesterday. No one has really fully taken control of the ACC. Obviously, Florida State has done a really good job the last couple of years, but the odds for them and Clemson to win the ACC are the exact same right now. So no one has, planted their flag in the ACC and, made that clear. So if you're Clemson, everything's still on the table for you. You can still reignite and be the Clemson of old if you can really put it together this year. Another thing that everyone's going to be watching is Cade Klubnik. Can he show up the way he didn't really a year ago? He had some flashes that were really incredible, didn't necessarily play with the consistency that you would want from your quarterback. Him and Garrett Riley still kind of finding that groove as a duo. So I think if he can hit his stride, this team is very, very interesting. And then finally, they're losing some big-time players on the defensive side of the ball. Who's going to be the people to step up? There are definitely some experienced guys that I fully expect to step up, but some younger guys are absolutely going to have to be big-time players for this team. And then things I'm watching, first of all, is Cade Klubnik the guy? We just talked about it. Does he have a go-to guy is another thing that I'm watching. And how good does that wide receiver room look overall? I think there's tons of ability in that room. There's always going to be with Clemson's recruiting ability, but someone like Bryant Wesco, a freshman that has kind of emerged throughout spring camp, is someone definitely to watch. Not sure if he's going to be wide receiver one necessarily, but he's definitely in that running, and they would take anyone to be that wide receiver one right now. So I'll be watching if Cade Klubnik has a guy that he keeps looking to, that he keeps going to the side of the field of, just because maybe that's the guy that is going to end up making all these plays for Clemson down the stretch. Another thing that I'm really watching is without Will Shipley, they need a difference maker at running back. That's the way that Clemson's offense works. If you don't have that difference maker at running back, things get a little bit sketchy pretty quickly. So I like Phil Maffa. He is not Will Shipley. He does not have the receiving ability. He does not quite have the shiftiness that Will Shipley does. Someone else is going to need to step up. And now Phil Maffa is plenty capable. He is going to be the starting running back. He will likely be able to flash some skills, but they're likely going to need a third down guy or someone to rotate in the same way they rotated in Phil Maffa a year ago. Someone like Jay Haynes is someone to watch throughout this game. If he can flash some receiving skills, some ability to make cuts. Obviously, in spring games when it's no contact, it's hard for these running backs to really light up the box score in any way, but you can definitely see some ability on these plays. So that's definitely something I'll be watching for. And then who's the leader of this defense is the biggest thing for me. Jeremiah Trotter is walking out the door. So who's going to kind of fill those shoes? In my opinion, Barrett Carter is the guy in the position to do it the best, but all of that can change very quickly. And also, they're going to need more than one vocal leader on that defense because they're losing a lot of guys, and you're going to need to replace that with really smart, really vocal leaders. Someone like Tyler Davis up front, losing him is absolutely huge for this team going into next year. So someone's going to need to step up at all of these position groups and be the vocal leader, be the heartbeat of that group, because this defense absolutely needs them. So that's going to be a huge thing to watch. And talking about this defense, the back end has been pretty much gutted this past offseason. Andrew Makuba found his way to Texas. Toriano Pride Jr. found his way to Missouri in the portal. And then Nate Wiggins is off to the NFL. So you're losing a ton of guys. You're going to need younger guys to step up. They still have not dipped their toe into the transfer portal waters. Now, it's possible they could in the spring one, but Dabo Swinney has shown no indication that he wants to get involved in the portal. So I'm going to hold off on that. I think they held one visit for one kid earlier in the season, but that was about it. So young guys are going to have to step up on that back end, or Dabo Swinney is going to have to make a little bit of a sacrifice later on this spring. But let's jump into the second team here, North Carolina State Wolfpack, a team that a lot of people are watching, and that's the number one storyline for them. Dark horse team in the ACC, possibly. They're someone that I think a lot of people are watching. Bringing in Grayson McCall as the starting quarterback is huge. This wide receiver group, as I was looking through it yesterday especially, is a lot stronger than I once thought it was. This is a group that can do a ton of different things. So how do they look the first time we get to see them in pads, running around full speed? It'll be really interesting to see all that. Tons of offensive transfers. How do they all come together, and how does everything look on that end of the ball? And then on the defensive end, you're losing Peyton Wilson, who was an absolute difference maker for them a year ago, a difference maker for them the last couple of years. And they're going to need someone to step up into that void, who is someone that's kind of showing up and kind of flashing on the screen. Tomorrow will be something I'm watching for very, very closely on the defensive side of the ball. And then a couple more specific things that I'm watching for. We talked about this wide receiver group. I think they are remarkably talented, but them and Grayson McCall got to get on the same page, and they have to do it rather quickly. Kevin Concepcion is the guy. He's going to be the wide receiver one if I had to guess, but Justin Jolly, a guy that transferred over from UConn, and then Noah Rogers, a transfer from Ohio State. Both guys very, very talented. Rogers did not get a lot of run at Ohio State, but let's be honest, it's not easy for wide receivers to get run at Ohio State. So definitely still very talented, was highly recruited out of high school, so very excited to see him jump into that. And then Justin Jolly is someone that they absolutely love over there in Raleigh, and someone that has big-time expectations for the Wolfpack. And then we talked about Peyton Wilson walking out the door. Saheem Battle is another guy on defense that is walking out the door. So two big-time players on the front end and the back end of that defense. You need guys to step up. And a transfer, Cam Riley from Auburn, is someone that is flashing in spring practice that absolutely could be that guy, but they're going to need more than him. So I'm definitely going to be watching out, especially for the back end of this defense that lost a number of guys, seeing who kind of stands out. If anyone is kind of being the alpha in that room, will definitely be something that I'm watching out for. And then let's get to Auburn, the last team that we'll fully break down, and then we have a little nugget on a team at the end here. But the storylines for this team is, let's ruin the fun for everyone else in the SEC. I don't think there's anyone out there necessarily that thinks Auburn can win a national title. I don't know if there's anyone out there that necessarily thinks they can win the SEC. But I know for a fact they're a team that can compete with a lot of teams in the SEC. And I know they're a team that can throw the wrench into some team season or a lot of team seasons. So I think that's one of the big things for them. The talent on this team is really good. It is Auburn, so the talent is going to be really solid. But I think there's a ability on this team that has not been there in past years, and obviously Hugh Freeze being at the helm of that offense really helps some of these upsets happen a little bit easier. But another thing to watch is Peyton Thorne going to hit another level? He just has to if they're going to be a better team than they were a year ago. He played good football in some games, not so good football in other games. He needs to be really consistent. He needs to be the leader that they brought him in there to be. So he's definitely something I'm watching very closely. And then can the defense take a step forward despite losing some big-time players? I think there's definitely some worry around this defense, especially with all the remarkable offenses across the SEC. I think they're going to have to take a step forward. They're going to have to do big-time things, and it'll be interesting to see if they can pull it off. And then what I'm kind of watching for more specifically, the second-year transfers is something that I'm watching very closely. Mainly Caleb Burton coming over from Ohio State a year ago. Didn't quite hit the strides that you would have wanted him to if you're an Auburn fan. And then Rivaldo Fairweather is a tight end that's a big-time player, and I think he's someone that could really pop onto the scene this year. Had a up and down 2023, but definitely could be a big-time player for them this year. And then losing guys like Jalen Simpson and DJ James on the back end of that defense is absolutely huge. They brought in Jaron Thompson from Texas and Antonio Kite from Bama. So two guys on that back end that I expect to play a lot, and especially a lot in the spring game to kind of get their feet wet in this new system. So I think those are two guys you will have to watch very, very closely to see if they're able to fill those shoes that they're going to have to fill. And then the line of scrimmage battle is kind of a no-sum game in spring practice and in spring games. You never really know who's winning and who's losing, or is the O-line just bad and the D-line's bad as well, but the D-line's just a little bit less bad than the O-line. It's always tough to gauge what these two lines will look like when it comes to actual fall games, but you get to see some guys stand out for sure. You'll be able to see some pass rushers stand out, which they absolutely need, and then which O-linemen are really, really stout, which is another thing they absolutely need. So I think Auburn is in a position where, yeah, you won't be able to tell exactly what the O-line will look like or exactly what the D-line will look like after this game, but you'll at least be able to get an idea of who the difference makers are going to be on both sides of those balls. So I think that's a really interesting one. Auburn is one of those teams that I'm watching incredibly closely because the floor and ceiling on this team are just miles apart. So I'm very interested to see what they can put together, because Hugh Freeze is really good at putting together a good team out of essentially thin air. But finally, I wanted to finish it off with UNLV. They're a team that I really enjoy for one very specific reason. They run a very weird offense, which is something, if you want me to watch, then run a weird offense and I am tuning in. But they run what they call a go-go offense, and it's kind of a multi-running back offense that leads to a lot of weird play designs, a lot of weird sets. So if you want to see some weird offense, tune in tomorrow to the UNLV game. They went to the Mountain West Championship a year ago, and they're continuing to try to build off that. And then one guy on the staff that absolutely will be a head coach this time next year is Brennan Marion, the OC. He is someone that has been a fast riser in this industry, came from Texas as the wide receiver coach to UNLV as the OC, and he's someone that has just impressed everywhere he's been. I think he will be all over athletic directors' minds around the country next year, and he's someone that if you see him on the sideline and in an SEC or a Big Ten position next year, do not be surprised, because this dude scores points and he scores a lot of them very quickly. So very excited to watch this game, very excited to see how they can kind of build off last year, and they're losing Jaden Maiava, their starting quarterback from a year ago. So who can kind of step into that role, and are they ready to roll is the big question. So tons to watch in those spring games. I always love this time of year because you get to talk yourself into pretty much anything when you talk about your team. You get to tell yourself that they're the best team in the country and they're going to win a national title. And it might not be true, but at the end of the day, you won't know for quite some time now. So this is a great time of year. I love spring games, and they're really starting to heat up starting this week, and the next couple of weeks especially are absolutely off the wall. So but that'll do it for this edition of the GSMC College Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so please remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It does make a huge difference to us. Also, we invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, all of the social pages for all the content and updates. We have so much stuff going on every single day, so many people doing incredible work across every sport you could possibly think of. So if you need anything in the world of sports, we have you covered. But thank you once again for listening, and I will see you guys Monday.